name is Donna Chang, but she's not Chinese. Another pretty good episode, and of course, just when things start going right for George, they get lousy. Because now he moves out of his parents' house, and now not only will he have to visit them, together on occasion, he has to now possibly visit them on 2 different occasions for everything now, which drives him absolutely bonkers. Also, we have Elaine, who yet ruins another relationship with her friend Noreen from the previous episode. Kramer apparently is trying to be Daddy Kramer, and Larry David is walking around in a cape. So what? I don't know. But let's talk about it. The Chinese woman. This is also the 90th episode of the series. So, we are heading the halfway point. We have 90 episodes into the 180 episodes in the entire Seinfeld series. So, this is the halfway episode. Of course, 10 more episodes so we get to the 100th episode clip show. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So, the Chinese woman. The episode opens up with Elaine, of course, I forgot to mention it, hype up Kramer's story. Wait till we get the... Oh yeah, I already hyped up Kramer. Never mind. So Elaine is mentioning how her friend Noreen, who in the previous episode was dating the high talker Dan, now dates a guy named Paul. Apparently, though, Elaine does not like Paul either, because Elaine will call trying to talk to Noreen. Paul would answer the phone. Instead of passing the phone on to Noreen, Paul will make chit-chat for, ever. And she thinks he is boring beyond belief. So anytime she calls and he answers, he just hangs up. So she's trying to avoid him at all costs. There's even a scene where she tries to call to talk to Noreen, and she has a hair dryer blowing in the background to act like she's driving and it's an emergency. She needs to talk to Noreen ASAP. That plan, though, unfortunately did not work. They eventually would break up, but it came back to bite her. Jerry, meanwhile, though, is trying to get a hold of George, who left a voice message on his machine. And all he said was, "It's George. I got nothing to say." He tries to call George back, and instead he gets a woman who picks up named Donna Chang. So Jerry apologizes and says, I'll call you back. And he says, "I'm sorry, wrong number." Tries calling again, he gets Donna Chang. Turns out that the lines are crossed, and for some reason any calls going to George are going to this Donna Chang woman. Donna, though, I guess tells Jerry over the phone that she's a huge fan of his. And they schedule a date. And Jerry's all excited, man, he goes, "I'm going out with a Chinese woman, I've never been out with someone Chinese or whatnot." He did date, Winona, who did have a different ethnicity also, but this is the first time he was dating someone who's Chinese, and he was like, "Oh wow, pretty stoked about it." Well, actually, if you want to also count Cheryl, who is the lawyer that was going to try to help Babu back in the visa, but she actually liked Jerry, but she actually was dating George. Then that too. But anyways, getting off track here. So George finally comes in and he gets on Jerry for not returning his call. But earlier in the episode, forgot to mention this, in the first scene, Jerry and Elaine were walking down through the streets, and they randomly see Frank Costanza coming out of some building with a man in a cape who was played by Larry David. And they're wondering, and George's wondering too, what's Mr. Costanza doing in the middle of the city with a man in a cape? George meets his dad for lunch, and his dad won't answer him about who the man in the cape is. He keeps focusing on the fact that Jerry and Elaine did not say hello when they saw him in the city the other day. Kramer, meanwhile, though, is freaking out because he's becoming very uncomfortable wearing jockeys. So, but then Jerry starts saying this thing where he needs to switch to boxers which Kramer says he's not comfortable with boxers. But basically tells him if you don't switch to boxers, then, well, it's going to affect your sperm count. Which Kramer freaks out and goes to see a fertility clinic to make sure he's not fertile. I mean, he's not infertile. And the doctor tells him that yes, indeed, you have a low count, and basically says he has to switch to the boxers, in which he is super uncomfortable with the boxers, how baggy they were, and he absolutely despises them. But of course, he finds out a better solution later on, which we'll talk about in a moment. But getting back to Jerry and Donna Chang. So Jerry has a date with Donna Chang, meeting her at a Chinese restaurant. Jerry's sitting there waiting for her to come. A woman, who's just American, walks around the corner. Beautiful woman, I'll say that. And she introduces herself to Jerry, says, "Hi, Jerry." And Jerry's like, "Excuse me, how may I help you?" She says, "I'm Donna Chang." And Jerry's like, "What do you mean you're Donna Chang?" She goes, "Oh, you thought I was Chinese." She's like, "Oh, no, we're originally Chinese Steen, or her original name was." So obviously, Jerry was a little disappointed that she's not Chinese. But later, was talking to Elaine and all of them, and basically he's still going out there because he says, well, she is a woman. So obviously, it didn't completely turn Jerry off. Meanwhile, though, Elaine is saying something about how, Noreen and Paul broke up. Jerry makes the joke and saying, wouldn't it be funny if the reason why they broke up, because Elaine didn't know yet at the time, if the reason why they broke up was because of Elaine constantly calling and hanging up? And what if Paul thought that maybe Noreen was secretly having an affair, when Elaine's like, yeah, right, that's not going to happen. In the midst of that conversation, though, Kramer comes in. He's all like smooth and looping and whatnot, and this and that. And I think Kramer then finds out that Noreen and Paul broke up, and he said something like, put in a good word for me, because I've always had a thing for Noreen, which Elaine basically says no. But Kramer again is just like jumping around, happy-go-lappy, and then Jerry goes, "Oh, I've seen you adjusted well to the boxers," and he goes, "Well, I wouldn't put it that way." He goes, "Oh, you went back to the jockeys?" And he goes, "Wrong again." And then Jerry's like, "There's only one solution." "Oh no, don't you realize? No boxers, no jockeys." And then Elaine's like, "Ugh." And then he says, "The only thing between him and us is a thin layer of gabardine." And then Jerry's like, "Say it ain't so, Kramer." "Oh, it's so." And then he goes, "I'm out there, Jerry, and I'm loving every minute of it." He's like, he's makes a couple other jokes and whatnot, and he exits. Then of course comes Donna Chang, who introduces herself to Elaine as Donna Chang. Jerry's mentioning, and it's true, how Donna has been making, even though she's not Chinese, she makes all these references, these Chinese references. So Jerry thinks, even though she's not Chinese, she likes pretending she's Chinese. But she never actually proves it, but you do see Jerry's point. She does make a lot of Confucius references, and says things the way Chinese people would say it. She basically has the Chinese culture in her, but she's not Chinese. So George then shows up, and he meets Donna Chang. And then Donna says how she ended up talking to George's mother last night for about an hour because of their lines crossing. Then she tells George his parents are separating, in which George just gets down on his knees, opens up the oven, sticks his head inside of it. And of course now the word is all out there, and George's freaking out. He's like, oh my goodness. He goes, I gotta go back and talking about this. He goes, I am not putting up with going to have to see them, to see it, 2 different times on 2 different on all these different occasions and whatnot. He's flipping out. So he says, I'm going back and I'm talking to them and trying to get them to not do this, because he would go insane with them being separated and, basically him being dragged in the middle of it all. But then later on, Donna apparently talks to Estelle again, and she convinces her not to get divorced. But it was only because, apparently, Estelle thought that Donna was Chinese. Because she invited Donna and Jerry over for dinner, which first off, Frank Costanza still yelling at Jerry, saying, "How come you didn't say hello to me the other day, blah, 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 this and that." And then Donna came in, and then when Estelle's like, "Who are you?" "I'm Donna Chang." And she's like, "You're not Chinese." And then blows the whole thing up in smokes again. And basically, they were just like, they get divorced. They're getting separated, which the Costanzas were separated for a time being. Getting back to, though, Elaine and Noreen, though. She goes out to lunch with Noreen. It was kind of like the same scene in the pledge drive, wherever Elaine was telling Noreen about how Dan's quite a little bit of a high talker and how all this mix-up happened. Well, Noreen, sure enough, does tell Elaine the reason why her and Paul broke up was because Paul thought that Noreen was having a secret affair because there was someone who kept calling and hanging up. And Elaine was trying to cover it up, saying, like, it could have been someone who was just, tired of the casual chit-chat and all this, that, and it was so boring and whatnot. And then Noreen realizes that obviously that it was Elaine, and then, at first she didn't seem too upset. She was like, "You really thought it was boring?" And then, basically, Elaine felt horrible. She tries to call Noreen later. Instead, Kramer picks up the phone. And because Kramer met earlier, he had a thing for Noreen, but he basically says what he even told her earlier. Noreen basically listens to everything Elaine says. She takes everything Elaine says as gospel, which is true. Apparently, Elaine convinced her to join the military. They convinced her to leave the military. She then convinced him to break up with Dan. To convince her to break up with Paul. Basically, she's made everything Elaine has told her, she takes it as gospel and does it. Elaine made some horrible remark about, it's not like I'm going to tell her to jump the Brooklyn Bridge. Like, if I actually told her, I think she actually would do it, basically, she said. And then basically, Elaine wanted to talk to Noreen, and Kramer's like, "Nope, not happening while I'm around," and hangs up on Elaine, which pisses off Elaine big time. But then the episode ends because Kramer was saying earlier how he was afraid of being infertile because the Kramer name, may not live on. Well, at the end of the episode, after the fallout at the dinner at the Costanzas, how Elaine, Jerry, and George were walking down New York Street. How they were talking about how George's parents being separated, and how George had to go to lunch with his mom. Then he met up with his dad later and played Clue with him. Noreen still won't talk to her. And then Jerry is just stuck in the middle of it basically, and of course he his thing is done with Donna Chang. But then we have Kramer screaming out of the Jerry's apartment window, going, "Hey, Jerry! Noreen! I think the Kramer name may be living on. Noreen's late! She's late!" Which Kramer as a father, no, I could not see Kramer being a father. But in season 6, most of the episodes having Jerry do a stand-up sequence at the end, they were showing a fallout scene for one of the stories. And I don't know if this is because, of, her being late or whatnot, but Noreen was, in fact, standing on the Brooklyn Bridge, about to jump. Until, who came to the rescue? The man in the cape. And basically says, "I'm Frank Costanza's attorney," and takes the hand, which that's the reason why what the man in the cape was in the end, because finally, whenever they were at that dinner party at the Costanzas, he said that man in the cape was his attorney. Excuse me. But he basically takes Noreen's hand, and she walks away with him, and obviously does not jump. Now, a fun fact though, there is an outtake that is played on several blooper reels and whatnot, and several clip shows that shows the man in the cape, which is Larry David, picking up Noreen and putting him in her arms, and they literally did jump off, and you hear a splash and land in the water. Now, I thought at first we did that was just like a gag to show that, hey, Superman's to the rescue, and you're jumping to save lives or whatnot. I don't know for save. I don't know what it is. I basically thought that it was just like a purpose gag on there, but apparently it's not the case. Apparently, what happened was originally in the script, Larry was supposed to pick up Maureen and carry her off. But apparently when they did that, Larry lost his balance, and that fall in the blooper reel was them for real falling off the set. Nobody was hurt though, thank goodness. But yeah, that was not done on purpose. All these are thought was done on purpose, but according to IMDb, that was not. So thank goodness they're okay. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it for the Chinese episode. And of course, I can safely say the first half of our Seinfeld reviews, as that's episode number 90. And we're going to move on now to the second half of this episodes. We have 2 more left on the first disc of season 6 to get to. But we'll get to the next episode, which is The Couch, in which we see the return of Pretty Sloppy Poppy. And Seinfeld also touches on another big subject that is definitely want to be cautious what you say we talk about it, but we'll do that, of course, when we get into the next episode. So, guys, that is my thoughts on the Chinese woman episode. What are your guys' thoughts on the Chinese episode? What are your thoughts on having them go in the direction of Frank and Estelle Costanza separating, and we thought of the Man in the Cave as well? Leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. Also, what are your thoughts on Kramer and us? Only thing between Kramer and us is a thin layer of gabardine. Leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. Be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. Follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirBoy93, and I'll see you guys in the next episode review, which again will be The Couch. Till then, guys, I'm the Club of Man93. I'll catch you guys all later. Peace out, everybody.